I am Ruth. I am 72 years old and I learned the truth about my family while lying alone in a hospital bed. The room smelled like disinfectant and quiet resignation. Machines hummed softly beside me, their steady beeping reminding me that my heart was still working, even if it felt heavier than it ever had before. The doctors said I was lucky. A mild stroke, they called it, caught early. No major damage. With rest and medication, I would recover. But luck is a strange word when you're staring at the ceiling tiles at 3 in the morning, wondering why no one has come to sit beside you. At first, I made excuses for them. That's what mothers do. Michael must be busy, I told myself. He always said work was stressful, even though I quietly covered his bills more often than I should have. Karen probably had her hands full with her own life. She'd grown distant over the years, polite but absent, like someone checking in out of obligation rather than love. The first day passed, then the second. No calls, no visits. No messages lighting up my phone. By the third day, the silence became too loud to ignore. A nurse came in to check my vitals, her movements gentle, practiced. As she adjusted the IV in my arm, she glanced at the empty chair beside my bed. "No family today?" she asked softly, trying not to sound intrusive. I shook my head. "Not yet, I'm sure they'll come." She hesitated, then gave me a look filled with something dangerously close to pity. "Sometimes families travel," she said carefully. "They might be out of town." Traveling, the word echoed in my mind long after she left. That afternoon, as sunlight crept across the floor, I asked another nurse if anyone had called for me. She checked the log, then shook her head. "No calls, Mrs. Ruth." Later that evening, I heard voices outside my door. Two nurses chatting quietly, unaware that every word was cutting straight through me. "They're in Europe, right?" one said casually. "Yeah," the other replied. "Must be nice. Paris, Rome, I saw photos." Europe, my family had flown to Europe. While I lay there learning how to move my fingers again without trembling, Michael and Karen were boarding planes. While I slept under fluorescent lights, they were clinking glasses somewhere across the ocean. They hadn't told me, they hadn't called, they hadn't even checked. The realization didn't hit like an explosion. It sank slowly, like cold water seeping into my bones. I stared at my hands resting on the thin hospital blanket and felt something inside me go very still. I replayed years in my mind. Michael calling when rent was due. Karen stopping by only when she needed a favor. Holidays I hosted, meals I cooked, money I quietly transferred so no one would feel embarrassed. And here I was alone. That night I didn't cry. I didn't have the energy. Instead, I lay there listening to the machines and allowed myself to think a thought I had avoided for years. Maybe I wasn't family to them anymore. Maybe I was just useful. When I was discharged a few days later, I expected relief. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. I took a taxi home, watching life pass by through the window, couples holding hands, mothers laughing with children. Ordinary moments that suddenly felt very far away. When we pulled into my driveway, my chest tightened. The grass was overgrown, newspapers were stacked against the door, the mailbox was stuffed so full it couldn't close properly. No one had been home. Inside, the air felt stale, untouched. A single plate sat in the sink, food hardened to its surface. On the kitchen counter lay an envelope I didn't recognize at first, a credit card statement. I sat down at the table and opened it slowly. Charges stared back at me. Hotels, restaurants, boutiques, dates that lined up perfectly with the days I'd been in the hospital. Paris, Rome, Milan, my name was on the account. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger, not yet, something colder, clearer. A knock came at the door, gentle and familiar. Mrs. Kendall stood outside, holding a small dish covered in foil. "Ruth, dear," she said warmly. "I saw the ambulance weeks ago. I was worried. I'm so glad you're home." Her kindness nearly broke me. We spoke for a moment, and as she turned to leave, she smiled casually. "Your kids looked so excited when they left. Suitcases everywhere. Europe, right?" I nodded. After she left, I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. They hadn't just gone, they had gone happily. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, the same room where I'd slept beside my late husband for decades. I stared at the ceiling and made a decision I should have made long ago. I would stop waiting. If they could leave me behind without a word, then I could finally choose myself without guilt. The next morning, I picked up the phone not to call Michael or Karen, but to call a locksmith. His name was Evan, his voice was polite, efficient. "How many locks?" he asked. "All of them," I replied. "Every door?" When Evan arrived, he worked quietly, respectfully, never asking why. With every turn of his tools, I felt something loosen inside me. Each replaced lock was a boundary I should have drawn years earlier. When he handed me the new keys, they felt heavier than metal should. They felt like ownership. That afternoon, I stood in the driveway staring at the old car Michael liked to borrow without asking. The same car Karen once called outdated and pointless. I smiled faintly. The next day, I sold it. I opened a new account, one they didn't know about. And that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky gold, I realized something important. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. While my family was flying across Europe, I had been lying still long enough to finally see my life as it truly was. And I wasn't going to live it the same way anymore. The first night back in my house, I didn't sleep. Not because I was in pain, not because I was afraid of another stroke, but because the silence was louder than anything I'd heard in that hospital room. I lay in my bed staring at the familiar cracks in the ceiling, the ones I used to joke about fixing someday. The clock on my nightstand ticked steadily, each second stretching longer than the last. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the wind brushing against the windows, the soft creak of the house settling like it was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. This house had always been full, not just of people but of purpose. I cooked here, I cleaned here, I paid bills at this table, I waited here. And now, without Michael or Karen, without even a note or a call, the place felt like it was revealing a truth I'd avoided for years. I wasn't missed. The next morning, I moved slowly through the kitchen, still unsteady on my feet. The kettle felt heavier than it used to. My hands shook just enough to remind me I wasn't fully myself yet. I made tea and sat at the table where I'd once served family dinners, staring at the empty chairs. Michael's chair was pushed back slightly, the way he always left it. Karen's place was spotless, as if she'd never really settled into it at all. I opened my phone, no missed calls, no messages. I told myself not to check again, but my fingers didn't listen. Still nothing. That was when the thought crept in, quiet but undeniable. If something had gone wrong after I came home, if I'd fallen, if I'd needed help, no one would have known. No one would have come. That realization didn't hurt the way betrayal usually does. It hardened into something sharper, something steady. Late that morning, I heard a knock at the door. It startled me more than it should have. I shuffled over and opened it to find Mrs. Kendall standing there, holding a small container wrapped in a towel. "Oh, Ruth," she said warmly, her eyes widening. "You're home. I was worried. I heard about the ambulance weeks ago." "Weeks," I smiled, though it took effort. "I'm all right now." She glanced past me into the quiet house. "I thought Michael or Karen would be here with you." I didn't answer right away. Mrs. Kendall hesitated, then filled the silence herself, the way kind people sometimes do. I saw them leaving not long after that. Suitcases, lots of them, looked like a big trip. Europe, I think. Michael was talking about it earlier this year. So it was true, not a rumor, not a misunderstanding. Europe wasn't a last-minute escape. It was planned. "They didn't say anything to you?" she asked gently. I shook my head. Her mouth tightened just a little. "Well," she said, placing the container in my hands, "I brought soup. In case you didn't feel like cooking." That small act, someone noticing, someone caring, nearly broke me, but I didn't let it show. After she left, I sat back down at the table and stared at the soup cooling in front of me. And for the first time since my husband passed, I felt something shift. Not grief, not loneliness, awareness. Michael hadn't needed me to be healthy, he needed me to be useful. Karen hadn't needed me to be present. She needed me to be available when it suited her. And now that I was inconvenient, now that I needed something in return, they were gone. That afternoon, I began opening drawers I hadn't touched in years. Filing cabinets stuffed with old statements. Envelopes I'd never bothered to sort. I didn't start with anger, I started with curiosity. I wanted to see the full picture. What I found made my hands tremble, not with fear, but with clarity. Bank statements showed withdrawals I didn't recognize. Credit card charges lined up perfectly with dates I'd been hospitalized. Hotels, restaurants. Purchases made without a second thought. They hadn't just left me alone, they had left me exposed. I closed the folder slowly and rested my hands on top of it. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window. An older woman, softer around the edges, tired but not weak. I realized something then. I had spent years assuming my role was fixed. Mother, support, backup plan, safety net. But roles aren't permanent when one side stops honoring them. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in gold, I made a list. Not dramatic, not emotional, just practical. Things I controlled. Things I no longer would. At the top of the page, I wrote one sentence. If I disappear tomorrow, who actually notices? The answer was painful, but it was also freeing. I didn't sleep much that night either, but this time it wasn't because of the silence. It was because my mind was finally awake, and by morning I knew my next step would be small, quiet, and symbolic. I wasn't going to confront Michael. I wasn't going to call Karen. I was going to protect myself. Because if they could fly across the world and forget I existed, then I could begin learning how to exist without them. And that was only the beginning. The decision didn't arrive all at once. It settled in slowly like dust after a long day. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. I stood in the hallway looking at the front door. The same door Michael had slammed more times than I could count. The same door Karen walked through without ever really seeing me. The same door paramedics had rushed through when my body finally gave out. That door had always been open to them. Too open. I picked up the phone and made a call I had never imagined making while my children were still alive and well. The locksmith arrived just before noon. Evan stepped out of his van with a small toolbox and an easy, respectful smile. He couldn't have been older than 35, young enough to be my grandson maybe. Old enough to treat me like I mattered. "Morning, ma'am," he said. "You called about changing the locks?" "Yes," I answered, my voice steadier than I expected. "All of them." He paused just a fraction, then nodded. "No problem, no questions, no judgment, just professionalism." As Evan worked, the house filled with unfamiliar sounds, the scrape of metal, the soft whir of drills. Each click felt final, like punctuation at the end of a sentence that had gone on far too long. "You live alone?" he asked gently, more out of politeness than curiosity. "I do now." He glanced up, reading the weight behind my words, and simply said, "Good locks make a big difference." They did, not just physically, emotionally. When Evan handed me the new set of keys, I held them in my palm longer than necessary. They were heavier than the old ones, or maybe that was just how freedom feels when you've been without it for years. Once he left, I walked from door to door, testing each lock. Click. Secure. Click. Mine. Michael's spare key was useless now. Karen's emergency copy meant nothing. For the first time in a long while, this house belonged only to me. That afternoon, I stood in the driveway looking at the car. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't new. But it had carried groceries, grandchildren, and memories. It had carried me to doctor's appointments while Michael complained about gas money. It had carried Karen to the airport more times than I could remember. They called it the old thing. I called it paid for. The dealership offered me more than I expected. I signed the paperwork without hesitation and watched the car roll away, sunlight flashing across its windshield one last time. The money went into a new account, an account Michael didn't know about, an account Karen had never asked to be added to. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and began writing things down. Dates, numbers, charges. I didn't rush, I didn't cry, I just recorded. Hospital stay, flight charges, hotels, restaurants. The pattern was unmistakable. While I was learning how to speak clearly again after the stroke, they were ordering wine in a language I didn't speak. The betrayal wasn't loud, it was quiet, calculated, casual. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The next morning, I made another call. This one took more courage. "Hello, this is Monica," the voice on the other end said, crisp and professional. "I'd like to discuss selling my house." Monica arrived 2 days later. She walked through each room with care, not just assessing value, but listening. She didn't interrupt when I told her why. "You're not running away," she said after a moment. "You're choosing something else." That distinction mattered more than she knew. We talked timelines, paperwork, quiet preparations, no signs. No announcements, no warnings. I wasn't interested in drama, I was interested in peace. That evening, Mrs. Kendall waved at me from across the street as I carried a box to my car. "Downsizing?" she asked cheerfully. "Something like that?" She smiled. "Good for you, Ruth." It struck me then how easily strangers could offer kindness when family withheld it. As night fell, I walked through the house one last time with fresh eyes. The living room where Michael slept through holidays. The kitchen where Karen criticized my cooking while eating every bite. The guest room where I waited alone during my recovery. I wasn't angry. I was done. I placed one final item on the dining table. An envelope. Inside it, nothing yet, just space. Space for words they would have to read when I was no longer there to soften them. Outside, the porch light flicked on automatically, illuminating the front door with its brand new lock. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the cool metal. Some doors are closed out of spite. Others are closed out of survival. And this was the first one I closed for myself. There is a certain kind of power in doing things quietly, not sneaking, not hiding, just moving forward without asking permission from people who never asked how you were doing in the first place. That's how the next few weeks passed for me. Quietly. Every morning I woke up early, made my tea, and sat at the kitchen table with a small stack of papers. Bank statements, utility bills, insurance letters. Things Michael and Karen had never bothered to read, even though they benefited from every single line item. I opened a new checking account in my name alone, then a savings account. Then I redirected my pension and Social Security deposits. I did it methodically, carefully, triple-checking everything. I had spent a lifetime making sure my children were comfortable. Now I was making sure I would be. The house began to change, not all at once, but gradually. I sold the dining table first, the one large enough for family dinners that never happened anymore. A young couple picked it up, smiling and holding hands, talking about hosting their first Thanksgiving. I wished them well and meant it. Then the spare couch. The one Michael slept on when he needed space but still expected dinner. Then the bookshelf Karen said she wanted someday, even though she never took a book from it. Each piece left quietly, no arguments, no guilt, just space opening up. Mrs. Kendall noticed, of course, she always did. "You're clearing out," she said one afternoon as I carried a lamp to my car. "I'm making room," I replied. She nodded like she understood more than she said. Monica checked in regularly. She was efficient without being pushy, respectful without being distant. "You don't have to rush," she reminded me. "I'm not," I said. "I'm ready." The paperwork moved faster than I expected. The market was strong. The house showed beautifully once it was emptied of memories and expectations that no longer belonged to me. While all this was happening, my phone stayed silent. No calls from Michael, no messages from Karen, not even a casual "how are you feeling now?" At first, the silence stung, then it settled into something else. Confirmation. One afternoon, I sat on the living room floor with a cardboard box labeled personal. Inside were the things I kept. My husband's watch, old letters, a faded photo of me holding Michael as a baby. One of Karen standing on a chair, laughing, missing her front teeth. I didn't throw them away, but I didn't build my life around them anymore either. That night, I opened my notebook again. This time, I wrote something different. I wrote a letter, not long, not dramatic, just honest. I didn't accuse, I didn't beg, I didn't explain every detail. I wrote about the hospital room, about the empty chair beside my bed, about waking up to find out they had left the country without telling me. I wrote about how that felt. Then I folded the letter and placed it in the envelope I'd left on the dining table days earlier. I sealed it, not to send, to leave. The final step came quietly on a Wednesday morning. I signed the last document with Monica. The house was officially sold. The funds would transfer within days. As I put the pen down, I felt something unexpected. Relief, not sadness. Not regret, relief. The house had been holding more than furniture. It had been holding expectations that were never met, roles I was tired of playing, a version of myself that believed love meant endurance. That evening, I sat on the porch one last time as the sun dipped low. The new locks glinted softly. The driveway was empty, the windows dark. For the first time in years, the quiet felt like peace instead of abandonment. Somewhere, Michael and Karen were still planning their return, still assuming, still unaware. And I wasn't angry at them for that. I was grateful, because if they had noticed sooner, they might have tried to stop me. And I was already too far gone to be pulled back. They came back on a Sunday afternoon. I know that because Mrs. Kendall told me later, her voice still tinged with disbelief, as if she'd witnessed something she couldn't quite explain. Michael arrived first. Suitcase wheels rattling over the driveway, sunglasses perched on his head like he'd just stepped out of a magazine instead of a plane that had crossed an ocean. He looked rested, tanned, unburdened. Karen followed not long after, her car packed tight, her phone already in her hand as if she were narrating her own return in real time. They were laughing, Mrs. Kendall said, talking over each other. Complaining about jet lag and airport food, they walked up to the front door like nothing had changed. Michael reached into his pocket, pulled out his key, and slid it into the lock. Nothing happened. He tried again, jiggled it. Turned it harder, still nothing. Karen stepped forward, irritation already sharp in her voice. "Give it here, you're probably using the wrong one." Her key didn't work either. That was when the laughter stopped. Michael rattled the handle again, harder this time, like the door owed him entry, like the house should recognize him, like I should still be inside, waiting. Karen pressed her face to the window. The house was empty, no couch. No dining table, no familiar clutter, just bare rooms and silence. Mrs. Kendall said Michael's shoulders stiffened, his posture changing in a way she hadn't seen before, confusion turning to unease. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. Karen stepped back, pulling out her phone. "Mom," she said sharply, already dialing. "Mom, this isn't funny." My phone was on the table beside me, miles away, its screen lighting up again and again. I didn't answer. They tried again. And again, Michael paced. Karen's voice rose. The children they'd brought with them grew restless, tugging at sleeves, asking why they couldn't go inside. And then Karen noticed the envelope. It was taped neatly to the front door. Plain. No name on the outside. Michael tore it down and opened it without hesitation. He read in silence. Mrs. Kendall said she saw his face change line by line, the color draining, the confidence slipping. Karen leaned over his shoulder, her eyes moving fast. Too fast. The words hit them both at the same time. I wasn't there. I hadn't left in a rush. I hadn't been taken anywhere. I had chosen to go. Mrs. Kendall crossed the street then, unsure if she should say anything at all. "Oh," she said gently, "you just missed your mother." Karen snapped her head up. "What do you mean, missed her?" "She moved out weeks ago," Mrs. Kendall replied. "Sold the car, too. She seemed lighter." Michael stared at her. "Moved where?" Mrs. Kendall shook her head. "She didn't say, just told me she was ready." The panic didn't explode right away. It crept in. Michael checked the mailbox. Empty. Karen tried calling again, straight to voicemail. Michael cursed under his breath, pacing faster now, anger and fear colliding. "This can't be real," he said. "She wouldn't do this without telling us." But she had. And that was the part that frightened them most. Because they had built their lives on the assumption that I would always be there. Always waiting. Always forgiving. That night, while they stood on the porch arguing about what to do next, I sat somewhere quiet, listening to the sound of water moving steadily against the shore. I didn't imagine their panic with satisfaction. I imagined it with distance. For once, I wasn't responsible for fixing it. The next morning, the calls started early. Michael, Karen, voicemail after voicemail. Their tones shifted quickly. First confusion, then irritation, then urgency. By afternoon, the messages softened. "Mom, just call us back. We need to talk. This has gone far enough." By evening, the silence stretched between us like a line they couldn't cross. I listened to every message. I saved none. That night, I slept deeply, not because I didn't care, but because for the first time, the weight of their expectations wasn't pressing down on my chest. They had come home expecting familiarity. They found absence, and absence I knew would teach them more than any argument ever could. It took them less than a week. Michael had always been good at tracking things down when he needed something. Bank information, paperwork, favors. And now me? The call came late in the afternoon, just as the light outside was starting to soften. I was sitting near the window, listening to the quiet rhythm of the place I had chosen. When my phone lit up with Michael's name again, I didn't feel panic or anger. I felt prepared. I answered. "Mom," he said quickly, relief and irritation tangled together. "Where are you?" "I'm safe," I replied calmly. "That's not what I asked." "I know." There was a pause, then Karen's voice cut in sharp and strained. "You can't just disappear like this. We've been worried." Worried. The word sat between us hollow. "I was worried too," I said. "When I was alone in the hospital, when no one came, when no one called." Silence. Then Michael sighed the way he always did when he wanted the conversation to turn practical. We didn't know it was that serious. You didn't ask, I said. Another pause, this one longer. We're nearby, Karen said finally. We want to talk face to face. I thought about that for a moment, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to choose my words carefully. All right, I said, you can come. They arrived the next morning. Michael knocked first, firm, expectant, like he still believed he had the right. Karen stood just behind him, arms folded, eyes already scanning the place as if measuring it. As if calculating. They both froze when I opened the door. This wasn't the version of me they were used to. I wasn't apologetic. I wasn't flustered. I wasn't reaching for them. I stepped aside and let them in. Michael looked around first, not at me, at the space. Smaller, simpler, quiet. This is where you've been, he asked. Yes, Karen exhaled sharply. You scared us. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat down. If you're here to talk, I said, then sit. They did. Michael leaned forward immediately. Mom, this whole thing went too far. Changing the locks, selling the house, disappearing. You should have talked to us first. I looked at him steadily. I spent years talking. You just weren't listening. Karen shook her head. That's not fair. We've always been there. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply asked, were you there when I woke up alone in that hospital room? Karen opened her mouth, closed it. Michael tried again. We were out of the country. We didn't know. You knew I was in the hospital, I said gently. You knew because Mrs. Kendall knew, because the neighbors knew, because the hospital tried calling. The room felt smaller then. Michael's jaw tightened. So what, you're punishing us? No, I said. I'm choosing myself. Karen scoffed. By cutting us off, by taking everything? Nothing I took belonged to you, I replied. And nothing I kept was taken from you unfairly. Michael stood abruptly. You can't just rewrite the rules because you're upset. I didn't rewrite anything, I said. I stopped playing. That stopped him. Karen's voice softened, but there was calculation behind it. What do you want from us, Mom? I met her gaze. I want nothing. That seemed to frighten them more than anger ever could. Michael ran a hand through his hair. You're acting like we abandoned you? You did, I said simply. The word hung in the air. Karen's eyes filled, but her voice was still defensive. We thought you'd understand. I understand perfectly, I replied. You chose yourselves. So did I. They stayed for another hour. They argued, they apologized, they blamed stress, travel, misunderstandings, and I listened. But I didn't bend. When they finally stood to leave, Michael paused at the door. So that's it? I nodded. That's it? Karen lingered, her voice quieter now. You really won't come back? I shook my head. There's nothing for me there anymore. They left without another word. After the door closed, I sat alone again. But it was different now. They had seen me, heard me, understood finally that I was serious. And that knowledge changed everything. Because from that moment on, they weren't waiting for me to come back. They were realizing I never would. After Michael and Karen drove away, the quiet returned slowly, like water settling after a stone has been dropped. I didn't move right away. I stayed where I was, sitting in that small room, listening to the sound of my own breathing. My hands were steady. My heart was, too. That surprised me. For years, every disagreement with my children had left me shaken, replaying conversations in my head, wondering what I could have said differently, how I could have softened myself to keep the peace. This time, there was none of that. No second guessing, no urge to chase after them and explain myself again. I had already explained, more than once, over decades. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the day went on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. A bird landed on the railing. Somewhere nearby, a door closed. Life, indifferent and steady, continued. That night's sleep came easily. Not the exhausted sleep of grief or the heavy sleep of avoidance, but a clean kind of rest. The kind that comes when your mind is no longer bracing for disappointment. In the days that followed, Michael called twice more. Karen sent a message that began with apology and ended with accusation. I read it once, then set the phone down. I didn't respond. Silence isn't cruelty when it's honest. I spent my mornings walking slowly, letting my body rebuild strength. I noticed things I hadn't noticed before. The way the light shifted across the floor. The sound of my own footsteps. The feeling of choosing what I wanted to do with my time instead of reacting to someone else's demands. Mrs. Kendall called one afternoon. I hope you don't mind, she said, but Michael stopped by asking questions. I didn't feel anger when she told me. Just understanding. He wanted to know if you'd said anything about where you were going, she continued. I told him you looked peaceful when you left. There was a pause on the line. I've never seen you look like that before, she added. Neither had I. Michael's absence didn't hurt the way I thought it would. Karen's silence felt familiar rather than cruel. What surprised me was how much space opened up inside me when I stopped waiting for them to change. I cooked for myself again, not the rushed meals squeezed between their schedules, but food I enjoyed. Simple things, warm things. I began sorting through my old notebooks, letters I'd written but never sent, plans I'd postponed. I realized how often I'd told myself later someday when things calmed down. Things never calmed down. I had simply grown tired. One afternoon, I took out the last item I'd brought with me from the house. The family photo album. I hadn't opened it since leaving. I expected pain when I did. Instead, I felt distance. The smiles in those photos were real once. I don't deny that. But they were moments, not guarantees. Love had existed. It just hadn't lasted in the way I needed it to, and that was all right. That evening, Monica called to confirm the final transfer. Everything was complete, clean, closed. When I hung up, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Finality. Michael and Karen were adults. Their lives would continue. They would explain my absence however they needed to. They might tell people I was stubborn, difficult, dramatic. I no longer cared. What mattered was this. I had stopped shrinking myself to stay connected to people who only noticed me when I was useful. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot and fast. What I felt was cooler, steadier, acceptance, the kind that lets you breathe. That night, as I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My face looked older than it once had, softer in some places, stronger in others. I looked like someone who had finally told the truth and survived it. Michael and Karen would carry their version of this story for the rest of their lives, and I would carry mine. Mine was quieter, but it was finally mine. There's a moment after everything is said and done when the noise finally fades. That's where I found myself, not triumphant, not bitter, just steady. Weeks passed after Michael and Karen left. The seasons shifted almost without my noticing. I stopped counting days by what I had to endure and started measuring them by what I enjoyed. Morning light became something I welcomed instead of rushed through. I learned the rhythm of my new surroundings, the quiet hours when the world felt gentle, unhurried. I walked more, I slept better, I laughed sometimes out loud, surprised by the sound of it. No one asked me for money. No one treated my time like it was endless and disposable. No one made me feel like love was something I had to earn by giving more than I had left. Mrs. Kendall sent me a handwritten note one afternoon, just a few lines. She said she hoped I was well, that the street felt quieter without me, and that she admired my courage more than she'd ever said out loud. I held that note for a long time. Courage, I'd never thought of myself that way. I thought of myself as practical, patient, necessary, but courage, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't make speeches. Sometimes it just packs up quietly and refuses to stay where it's no longer respected. I thought about Michael and Karen often, but not the way I used to, not with worry gnawing at my chest, not with guilt whispering that I should fix things, soften things, bend. I thought of them as people on their own paths now. They would tell their version of the story. I couldn't control that. Maybe I'd be the cold mother, the unreasonable one, the woman who chose distance over family, but I knew the truth. I didn't walk away from love. I walked away from neglect dressed up as obligation. One afternoon, as I sat near the window watching clouds drift slowly across the sky, I realized something else had changed. I wasn't waiting anymore, not for an apology, not for understanding, not for permission to live the rest of my life in peace. Waiting had been my longest habit, waiting for them to call, waiting for them to notice, waiting for the version of family I kept hoping would return. But hope, I learned, can become a cage when it's fed only disappointment. So I stopped. I took out a notebook and began writing again, not lists, not records, but thoughts, memories, small joys. Things I wanted to do simply because I wanted to. There was freedom in that. I updated my plans carefully. My will reflected my values now, not my fears. What I had would go where it could do good, where it could be appreciated instead of expected. Some might say that was harsh. I say it was honest. The last time Michael called, I let it go to voicemail, not because I hated him, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I finally understood something simple and powerful. I didn't owe anyone access to my life just because we shared blood. Love without respect is not love. Family without presence is just a word. In peace, real peace, sometimes comes only after you stop trying to convince others that you matter. I mattered whether they saw it or not. As evening settled in, I made myself tea and sat quietly, watching the day come to a close. The world felt wide again, full of possibility in small, ordinary ways. I wasn't lonely, I was free. And if there's one thing I hope stays with you after hearing my story, it's this: you are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to walk away from what hurts you, even if it wears the name family. You are allowed to build a life that feels like rest, not obligation. It took me 72 years to learn that, but I learned it in time, and that to me is everything.